The Maryland Goatman, a hiker's last words. In the dense, twisting woods of Prince George's County, Maryland, a malevolent creature has been said to lurk for generations. Locals call it the Maryland Goatman, a monstrous figure with the upper body of a man and the legs and head of a goat, complete with piercing red eyes that glow in the darkness. For years, tales of this half-man, half-goat terrorizing unsuspecting visitors have made their rounds, particularly among teenagers looking for a thrill. But in 1971, a group of 5 friends ventured into those woods for what they thought would be a night of innocent camping, forever changing how the story was told. Armed with only flashlights, sleeping bags, and nerves of steel, the group set up camp just after sunset. As darkness crept in, the usual forest sounds began to shift into something more sinister. Low, guttural noises drifted through the trees, growing louder and closer with each passing hour. At first, they joked about the Goatman being nearby, but as the night wore on, the laughter died away. Around midnight, the sounds grew louder, hooves crunching over fallen leaves, a rhythmic clopping that echoed around their campsite. One of the teens, Mark, thought he saw something just beyond the circle of light, a hunched figure with what looked like horns. Suddenly, a high-pitched scream shattered the night, and the group scattered in terror. Only one of them made it out of the woods, stumbling back at dawn, wild-eyed and shaking. He babbled incoherently about hooves in the dark and a face with eyes like embers, the terror in his voice enough to send chills down the spine of even the most skeptical officers. When the search party went looking for his friends, they found only the remnants of a campsite, torn sleeping bags, scattered belongings, and, burned into the ground, 2 massive cloven hoof prints. The survivor was eventually committed to a mental institution, where he never spoke another word. The missing teens were never found, and the Goatman remains, haunting the woods, an unseen terror waiting for his next victim. The haunting of Texas Goatmans Bridge. Old Alton Bridge in Denton County, Texas, isn't just a historical landmark, it's a place dripping with supernatural lore. Known as Goatmans Bridge by the locals, it's said to be haunted by a malevolent half-man, half-goat spirit that appears only at night. The legend dates back to the 1930s when the successful black goat farmer, Oscar Washburn, earned himself the name the Goatman due to his sizable livestock and his prominence in the area. But in those days, success could breed resentment and jealousy, and some people whispered that his powers over the animals were unnatural. A hateful group of locals decided to act on their fears and lynched him, hanging him from the bridge on a dark summer night. According to the tale, the men threw him over the edge, but when they looked down to see his lifeless body, they found nothing but an empty noose swinging in the night air. Frustrated and horrified, they searched the area for hours, finding no trace of him. As the years went by, strange occurrences began to happen around the bridge. Travelers reported seeing a goat-headed figure roaming the nearby woods and hearing strange, bleating cries that echoed across the river late at night. Brave visitors who crossed the bridge reported sensations of being watched, their car engines mysteriously stalling in the middle of the bridge, or even seeing hoof prints appear in the mud out of nowhere. In 1967, 2 teenagers dared each other to visit the bridge at midnight. They brought flashlights and a recorder to document any strange phenomena. But only one of them returned. The survivor claimed they had seen a dark figure with twisted horns and glowing eyes standing in the center of the bridge, staring them down as they approached. In a panic, they ran, but his friend tripped and was left behind. When he went back with the police, there was no body, no sign of his friend, only deep hoof prints, leading off into the woods. The survivor never returned to the bridge and moved away shortly after, but locals still swear that the Goatman haunts the bridge to this day, luring those who dare to enter his domain. Vanished in plain sight, the Goatman of Wisconsin. In rural Wisconsin, a legend has circulated for decades about a creature lurking in the forests, described as a grotesque half-goat, half-human beast with a grudge against anyone who dares disturb its territory. 3 college students, Jake, Lisa, and Paul, went camping in the woods for a weekend, hoping to unwind and test the local legend. On the first night, They heard strange noises, branches cracking, leaves rustling, and what sounded like laughter mixed with bleating. Jake, the boldest of the three, decided to investigate, leaving the others behind. Hours passed, and he didn't return. Lisa and Paul grew frantic, calling his name into the night, but only silence responded. Just when they considered going for help, they heard Jake's voice in the distance, calling them deeper into the forest. Relieved, they followed the sound, only to find nothing when they arrived. No Jake, just an eerie silence and an unnatural cold that hung in the air. The next morning, park rangers found Lisa wandering along the road, incoherent and alone. She was in shock, muttering something about hooves and cold eyes. Paul and Jake were never found, and a search of the area only turned up 3 deep, cloven hoof prints leading away from the campsite. Locals say the Goatman claimed his due that night, and they warn anyone who will listen to avoid those woods once the sun goes down. The Kentucky Goatman's attack. A farmer in rural Kentucky swears he had a run-in with the Goatman after an eerie night in 1992. Joe Dalton had heard rumors of a strange creature killing livestock in the area, but he dismissed them as nonsense, that is, until he came home one night to find his animals scattered, their enclosures broken open, and the barn door swinging ominously in the wind. He heard a scratching noise coming from inside and, thinking it was a thief, grabbed his rifle and went to investigate. As he stepped into the barn, the overpowering smell of wet fur and rot filled his nostrils. Standing in the shadows was a creature he could barely believe was real, a massive, muscular figure with the head of a goat and eyes that glowed a sickly yellow. It looked at him and laughed, a hideous, high-pitched sound that echoed off the barn walls. Joe fired, but the creature didn't flinch, simply watching him with those unblinking eyes as if mocking him. He fled, leaving his home behind. Joe never returned to that property and eventually moved out of state. To this day, no one knows exactly what he saw in that barn, but the locals say that he encountered the Goatman and narrowly escaped with his life. The roadside encounter in Minnesota. In Minnesota, an elderly couple experienced a close encounter with the Goatman while driving late one night. They were returning from a family reunion when they noticed something strange on the side of the road. At first, they thought it was a deer, but as they got closer, the creature raised its head. It had the twisted face of a goat, but its body was that of a man, hunched and covered in wiry hair. Its eyes glinted in the headlights as it raised a hand and waved, a mocking grin on its face. Panicking, the husband pressed the gas pedal to the floor, speeding away as the creature watched them vanish into the distance. When they told the story, they were met with skepticism, but the couple insists that what they saw was real. The husband never took that route again, fearing that the Goatman might be waiting for him, ready to finish what it had started. The Phantom Stalker of Popic, Kentucky. Just outside Louisville, Kentucky, the small town of Popic has long whispered about a creature known as the Goatman. But this isn't just any Goatman. Locals claim he's a vengeful spirit lurking around an old, abandoned train trestle, luring victims to their deaths. They call it the Popic Monster, said to be a cursed half-man, half-goat hybrid that haunts the high beams of the trestle, waiting for those who dare to wander too close. In 1988, a young couple decided to climb the trestle on a dare, determined to see if the tales were real. As they reached the center, a strange, hypnotic sound echoed through the air, like a bleating chant, deep and rhythmic, coaxing them further along the tracks. Suddenly, a train's whistle shattered the eerie silence. Panicked, they looked around for a place to escape, but the train was bearing down on them. The boy managed to cling to the edge, but his girlfriend wasn't so lucky. She was struck by the train, falling to her death. He survived but was never the same, claiming that the Goatman had called to them, luring them onto the trestle, trapping them on purpose. Since then, others have reported hearing voices or strange laughter coming from the trestle at night. Those who venture too close often find themselves overwhelmed by an urge to climb. Locals warn that the search is the Goatman's way of claiming his next victim. The Goatman's warning on a quiet country road. One stormy night in Virginia, a young woman named Tessa was driving home from work on a winding country road. It was past midnight, and the storm had picked up, causing her to slow down as rain and wind lashed against her windshield. The road was deserted, and visibility was terrible, but she pressed on, hoping to make it home before the storm worsened. As she rounded a bend, she spotted something in her headlights, standing right in the middle of the road. At first, she thought it was an animal, maybe a large deer. But as she got closer, her heart dropped. The figure was unlike anything she'd ever seen, tall, muscular, and humanoid, with the twisted head of a goat and shaggy, dripping fur. Its eyes glowed with a strange, yellow light, and as she approached, it raised one hand as if beckoning her closer. Frozen with terror, Tessa couldn't move. She stared as the creature held up its finger to its lips, as if shushing her, and then slowly turned and disappeared into the woods. The next morning, she told her story to a neighbor, who nodded knowingly. "You saw the Goatman," he said gravely. "He only appears to give a warning. You're lucky, most don't get to drive away." Lost hunters in the Ozarks. Deep in the Ozarks, two experienced hunters went missing for nearly a week after a terrifying encounter that changed them forever. They had heard of the Goatman from an old trapper but didn't believe the tale. But as they tracked deer through the dense forest, strange things started happening. Their compass began to malfunction, leading them in circles, and they started hearing faint footsteps trailing them, keeping pace even as they tried to lose the sound. On the fourth day, they spotted what they thought was a large buck, but as they approached, they saw it was something much stranger. A figure stood in the distance, hunched and shaggy, with long horns and deep, black eyes that stared right into their souls. It let out a bellowing bleat, a sound that shook them to their bones and sent them running back the way they came. They finally found their way back, but they were bruised, scratched, and disoriented, barely able to speak about what they'd seen. All they could mutter was, "It wasn't human." The Curse of the Abandoned Farmhouse. In rural Alabama, an old farmhouse has stood abandoned for over a century, its rotting walls overgrown with vines and rumors of a cursed goatman. They say the creature haunts the land, appearing to trespassers with a warning, "Leave or be claimed." When two paranormal investigators decided to explore the property, they were eager skeptics, armed with high-tech gear and flashlights. But as soon as they entered the barn, the air grew heavy, and a deep chill filled the room. They set up their cameras and began their EVP, electronic voice phenomenon, session, asking for the Goatman to make his presence known. As they played back the recording, they heard a low, mocking laugh and then a single word, "Leave." Ignoring it, they continued, but suddenly, heavy footsteps began echoing outside the barn, circling it slowly. The smell of sulfur and wet fur filled the air, and a shadow passed across the broken windows. Terrified, they ran, leaving their equipment behind. When they reviewed the footage the next day, all they found were minutes of distorted audio, punctuated by strange hoofbeats, and a final image on their video camera, a pair of glowing eyes, staring directly into the lens. The Goatman's Lure in the Smoky Mountains. 3 college friends decided to hike the Smoky Mountains one weekend, eager to escape city life and take in the beauty of nature. They had heard the story of a creature that haunted the trails, a Goatman said to mimic voices to lure people off the path. But they dismissed it as local folklore, a tale meant to keep kids from wandering off. On the second night, they set up camp and built a fire, laughing and sharing stories. Around midnight, they heard a voice in the distance, calling one of their names. Thinking it was another hiker in need, one of them got up to investigate, but as he ventured closer to the sound, it moved further into the woods. The voice continued, calling his name with a sense of urgency, leading him deeper and deeper away from the camp. Suddenly, he realized he was alone. The voice had stopped, and all he could hear was silence. And then, the sound of hooves. Frightened, he sprinted back to camp, but when he arrived, his friends were gone. He called for them, but only his echo answered. Search parties were organized, but his friends were never found. All he could remember were the words the locals told him when he returned: "The Goatman loves the mountains, he lures you in and takes you away forever." The Unseen Terror of Salt Creek. In Indiana, near Salt Creek, There's a lesser-known Goatman legend, though to the few who've encountered it, it's one they'll never forget. Tom, a truck driver making a late-night haul, had pulled over by Salt Creek to check his tires when he saw something moving in the distance. Thinking it was a stray dog, he ignored it and went about his task. But when he looked up again, the figure had come closer, a hulking shape, with shaggy fur and what looked like twisted, gnarled horns. Before he could react, the figure let out a horrific, guttural growl, and Tom stumbled back into his truck, locking the doors. The creature began circling the truck, scratching at the sides with what sounded like claws. Tom didn't wait to see what would happen next. He started the truck and sped away, his heart pounding. When he looked in his rearview mirror, he saw the creature standing on the road behind him, watching, as if daring him to return. To this day, he avoids Salt Creek, swearing that the Goatman nearly claimed him that night. The Wailing Goatman of Grafton Woods. In Grafton, Ohio, there's an eerie forest known for sightings of a creature locals call the Wailing Goatman. Legend has it that he haunts a specific grove, calling out in the voice of a child or a woman in distress to lure anyone nearby deeper into the woods. A young couple went hiking one autumn evening, eager to capture the changing colors of the leaves. They had heard about the Wailing Goatman but didn't believe the stories. As they walked, a sound began echoing through the trees, a faint, crying voice, calling for help. The woman insisted they check it out, certain it was a lost child. They followed the voice until they reached a small clearing, and that's when they saw him, a towering figure with the body of a man and the head of a goat, horns curling around a twisted face. His eyes locked onto them, and he let out a deafening scream, a noise that shook them to their cores. They turned and ran, not stopping until they reached their car. When they told their story, others reported similar encounters, with each account adding to the legend. Grafton locals now warn anyone heading into the woods to ignore the cries they may hear, lest they end up face to face with the Wailing Goatman. The Hunter's Nightmare in the Pacific Northwest. In the mist-laden forests of Washington state, seasoned hunter Gary Hall had heard plenty of campfire stories about the Goatman. But Gary, known for his skill in the woods, dismissed it as folklore, until one fateful autumn night. While tracking a large buck in a secluded part of the forest, Gary noticed the woods had gone completely silent. No rustling leaves, no scurrying animals. Just an unsettling, unnatural stillness. As he scanned the trees, he caught sight of something moving, a tall, horned figure in the distance. It seemed to be watching him, its eyes reflecting a strange, sickly light. He raised his rifle, feeling the creature's eyes boring into him. But as he prepared to shoot, he realized he couldn't move his finger. The creature let out a bone-chilling laugh, a sound halfway between a bleat and a human laugh, and began advancing, each step echoed by the snapping of branches and crunching of leaves. Gary managed to break free from his trance and ran, leaving his rifle behind. He later returned with a group, but they found no tracks, no evidence of anything out there. All that remained was his abandoned rifle and, next to it, a single deep hoof print. The Silent Stalker of Elk Creek. In 1995, a young man named Andy was out fishing by Elk Creek in Pennsylvania when he heard a strange noise, like faint, eerie laughter floating through the trees. Thinking it was just someone else nearby, he ignored it. But soon, he noticed something moving just beyond the tree line, a figure watching him from the shadows. Its face, from what he could make out, had the twisted, bestial look of a goat, yet its posture was eerily human. Feeling uneasy, he gathered his gear to leave, but when he turned around, the creature was now closer, standing on the edge of the water. He stumbled backward, his heart racing, unable to look away as it cocked its head, studying him. Then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the figure turned and melted back into the woods, leaving behind only the sound of hooves clopping away and a faint, mocking laugh that echoed long after it was gone. To this day, Andy refuses to fish anywhere near Elk Creek, haunted by the creature's silent, knowing gaze. A terrifying collie in the mountains of Tennessee. In the Smoky Mountains of Tennessee, a group of friends set out on a weekend camping trip to unwind and enjoy the mountain air. They had heard whispers about strange happenings in the area but didn't take them seriously. That night, as they sat around the campfire sharing stories, one of them heard a voice from the woods, someone calling his name. At first, he thought it was a prank, but soon, the voice grew insistent, pleading, and filled with despair. Against his friend's warnings, he wandered toward the voice, feeling a strange compulsion to follow it. The further he walked, the louder the voice became, until he found himself face to face with a hunched figure standing just out of reach of his flashlight beam. It had twisted, shaggy fur, glowing eyes, and horns curling around a face that was neither fully human nor fully animal. The creature let out a deep, menacing growl, and the man turned to run, stumbling back to camp in a panic. His friends said he came back pale and shaking, mumbling about something waiting in the trees. The group left the next morning, and he never spoke of it again. Locals say the Goatman still roams the Smokies, luring those who wander too close with a familiar voice, waiting to lead them into the darkness where he dwells. The Beast of Devil's Backbone. Devil's Backbone, a rugged stretch of hills in Texas Hill Country, is known for its eerie tales and paranormal sightings. One legend speaks of a goatman that haunts the area, preying on those who wander too close to the cliffs. In 2010, a group of friends went hiking in the area, eager to see if the legends were true. As dusk settled, they noticed an overpowering smell, like rotting meat, filling the air. Then came the sounds, slow, deliberate hoofbeats on the rocks, echoing from somewhere just out of sight. One of them dared to climb further up the trail, ignoring his friend's protests, until he froze, his flashlight trained on a figure looming just a few feet away. It was massive, covered in dark, matted fur, with the twisted head of a goat and human-like hands with sharp, black claws. It locked eyes with him, and a smile spread across its grotesque face as it raised one clawed finger, beckoning him forward. The young man stumbled back, tearing down the trail with his friends close behind. They never spoke of what they'd seen that night, but years later, they still say that when the wind howls over Devil's Backbone, they can hear faint hoofbeats in the distance, as if the creature is still there, waiting. The Goatmans Forest of Whispers. In a quiet forest near the Canadian border, locals speak in hushed tones about a haunted grove said to be home to the Goatman. Hikers report hearing whispers echoing through the trees, soft, breathy voices calling their names, or even reciting prayers. The forest is dense, the trees seeming to twist together, forming a dark canopy that blocks out most of the light, and the air grows thick as soon as you enter. Two young campers decided to spend the night there, hoping to capture footage of the strange sounds. Around midnight, the whispers began, calling each of them by name. They brushed it off as the wind, but the voices grew louder, clearer, until they realized they were surrounded. Desperate, they tried to flee but found themselves disoriented, their flashlights flickering. The whispers turned to growls, and the shadows seemed to shift, revealing a figure lurking just at the edge of their vision, a hunched, goat-headed shape with piercing eyes. The campers finally managed to escape, finding their way back to the road as dawn broke. They never reviewed the footage they'd captured, too shaken by what they'd encountered. The forest remains shunned by most locals, a place where only the brave, or the foolish, venture after dark, knowing they might hear the whispers calling to them.